So we are here to talk about this quite remarkable book, God is Stranger. And that title, I think, packs the whole meaning of the book, in a way, in. Let's talk about the most natural meaning of that title, and then the meaning that's kind of hidden behind it. What do you mean when you say God is stranger? Are you saying God is strange?
I am saying God is strange.
Yeah.
That he is difficult to comprehend. I remember when I first became a Christian, I was given a Bible and I was given a highlighter pen. And the highlighter pen, what was I supposed to do with it? I was supposed to highlight the bits of the Bible that I approved of, that I liked.
It made you feel warm and fuzzy inside.
Right.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is most of us have that kind of highlighter pen approach to Scripture.
Yeah.
There are certain bits we feel comfortable with. There are certain bits we like to put on our fridges and magnets and pencils and T-shirts. But it's all those unhighlighted parts of the Bible, the bits where God is just weird or strange.
Yes.
Like there are some groups where they go around leaving Bibles in hotels, but they normally leave the New Testament and the Psalms, not the Old Testament, because the Old Testament's a bit strange.
Right.
To be honest, a lot of the Psalms are pretty strange. Maybe we just...
And there are parts of the New Testament that are strange. What are some... every chapter in the book kind of takes one of these biblical moments. What to you are the strangest moments that you cover in God is Stranger?
So probably the strangest is early on in the book. We look at why God would turn up at Abraham's tent as at least God and two angels.
Yes.
You know, three
Or
strangers turning up.
Who these three people are.
But the very next thing, and you know, God has already appeared to Abraham. This is not the first encounter that God has with Abraham. And yet he hides himself. Why would he do that? And then the very next encounter is, I think, one of the strangest stories in the Bible, in that you've got Lot in Sodom, and two angels come to visit him, and then the whole city, all the men of the city come out to sexually abuse these visitors, and then Lot says that he would rather sacrifice his daughters than offer, anything bad to happen to his guests. So we thought we'd look at that.
This is not Sunday school approved material.
It's funny. Like I was reading through the book of Daniel with my kids, and Daniel's in the lion's den. Great. Yeah. Daniel gets rescued. Great. And then Daniel is told that everyone that was opposed to him, them and their wives and children, are going to be thrown into the lion's den instead. Wow. So there are lots of these unsafe, dangerous, strange parts of the Bible that we Christians are a bit nervous about. And my feeling is, we live in a strange world. We live in a world of incredible complexity. And if we've only got a fridge magnet version of Christianity, we actually leave ourselves and our children, as they kind of face life, actually ill-equipped. And I'm old school. I believe all Scripture is God-breathed and useful. So let's look at some of those unexamined parts.
Wow. So actually the Lot story, with all its kind of horror, really, unpacks the other side of what you mean by this title, I think, which is how God comes to us in the guise of literal strangers, people who are strangers to us.
Yes.
And woven through this whole book is this other side of God showing up in our lives through people who we wouldn't expect to be part of God's story in our life. So talk about the literal strangers that you're trying to get us to pay attention to in this book.
So there is a double whammy in the title, as you've picked out. And, God is strange, but he's also the stranger.
Right.
And the easy places to see that, one most famously would be Matthew 25, where Jesus says, I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was a stranger, and you welcomed me in. But the other one for me is the Emmaus Road. So, Cleopas and his partner, whoever it was, walking away from Jerusalem, they'd witnessed the crucifixion of Jesus. They thought this was going to be the turning point, and it is a turning point, but it's a negative one. And then a stranger comes alongside them, and, it's so funny because they say, don't you know what's been going on here? And they tease him a little bit. And it's only when he's about to move on and they invite him into their home and they break bread with him that then their eyes are opened. And so it's in this act of hospitality that you have another level of engagement with God. So if God is strange to you, difficult to understand, that the logic of this book is, as we invite the stranger into our lives, we get another level of intimacy, not just with that stranger, but with God himself. That's the big idea.
Wow. So who are the strangers that you most hope we will pay attention to and invite in?
So this is a little bit controversial right now, particularly with the US immigration policy. I think one whole area in the Old Testament, the stranger was literally someone that was living away from their family circle.
Yes.
So, Ruth was a stranger.
Yes.
I mean, she's a biblical hero. We love her. We run conferences about her, but she was a refugee.
Yes.
And it's the widow, the orphan, and the stranger.
Yeah.
That kind of threefold description. Those are the people that I think need to be top of our priorities. So in the UK, we've been heavily involved in refugee response, but the orphan in our culture are basically kids within the care system that need our love and care.
Yes.
And so we're very hot on things like fostering and adoption. Yeah. And sadly, in our culture as well, the elderly are often really wrestling with loneliness, single-person households. So we think those are probably the three priorities. But the book is not designed as a kind of activist handbook. Mm-hmm. It's trying to open our eyes to a deeper intimacy with God. It's theologically grounded. Hopefully it's accessible. But it's trying to help us see this is the route to intimacy with God. That's what we're after.
It's kind of amazing that God, who is intrinsically so strange to us, identifies with and makes himself known in some ways as the people who seem kind of disconnected from the normal course of life, right? Yes. In a way, what is to be a widow, an orphan, an alien, is to be someone who kind of got uprooted from what we think of as the natural, normal story. Yeah. But that's actually where God is met, is what you're saying.
Yes, really good.
And so those of us who, for this moment in our lives, because all of us easily could end up being in one of those categories, but for this moment, maybe we're in very comfortably kind of woven into the way things normally work. I have a wife, I have children, I have a job. Any of those could change, but for the moment I'm kind of well situated. But I think what you're saying is for me to really meet God, I'm not going to find him in the kind of natural, normal course of events, or at least I'm not going to find the whole God, the whole truth about God. And instead I have to seek him out or welcome him in the form of these people who seem to have, I could have nothing to do with them and my life would go on just fine, except I wouldn't find out who God really is. Is that an accurate way of putting what you're saying?
I think it is. And we go back to that Abraham story, these three wanderers, that's a bizarre way for God to turn up, and yet it is in welcoming them that Abraham has a whole nother level of experience with God. Wow. So I think that's really part of it. And Luke's Gospel is one of my favourites because almost every person that Jesus encounters is either incredibly rich and needs to have a mindset shift or marginalised.
Wow.
And it's that interplay, the parable of the sheep and the goats. We don't know the circumstances of those that welcomed. We don't know how rich or poor they were.
Right.
We just know they showed hospitality to people in need. And for me, it's such a radical parable because you'd expect this. This is the clearest parable about life after death. Jesus is really clear about heaven. He's really clear about hell. Not popular topics in some circles. And the baseline entry point is not, did you turn up at church? Was your doctrinal confession good enough? Did you have a religious experience? Did you sing a lot? It's, did you welcome the vulnerable?
Wow.
And you think, wow, this is not salvation by works by any stretch of the imagination, because the next thing that happens in Matthew's Gospel is Jesus dies on the cross. So who needs to die on the cross if works are your entry point to heaven? But this is evidence that you've received grace. And if you've received grace, then grace seeks out the lost, grace seeks out the vulnerable and offers them compassion. That's the God virus, if you like. That's what God does to us. He changes our response to other people. A friend of mine has a sign on his house, and it says, "Love me, love my dog." And you can't love this guy and reject his dog. And the two greatest commandments, what are they? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbour. And so you flip it around. If you don't love your neighbour, and your neighbour's anyone in need, then we don't love God. So those two things, I think, are intimately connected.
So I wrote the foreword to the U.S. edition of your book.
Thank you. You replaced Archbishop Justin Welby.
Right. Well, we don't have an archbishop to take my place in the U.S. I was the next best thing. But the reason, I wrote it because the book is so striking and valuable, I think. But one of the things I said in it is I would go anywhere to read what you write, and I would cross an ocean to spend time with you because when I do, I'm so challenged by what you say. So thank you for putting that challenge into print for all of us and for this really, really amazing invitation to meet God in the stranger, who it turns out is part of God's story for us.
Well, thanks for spending the time, Annie, and thanks for putting a tie on so that we can have this conversation here.
Even for you, I will put on a tie.
Good man.